Hello music makers, welcome back. Today I want to show you a little chord trick. I call it the someday chord, as it's a key component to making that classic riff so iconic in the original Someday by C.C. Rogers. This is one of those musical tricks that's really easy to show, but harder to explain why it works. So we're going to do it in this order. First, I'll show you why it's different, why it's interesting. Then I'll show you the quick hack so you can apply it to your own progressions. And then lastly, for those who care about the nerdy side of it, like I do, we'll dive a little deeper into the theory. Let's go. Right, here's my little recreation of the famous riff. Beautiful. So the good news is this track is in the key of A and the scale is minor. This is good news because we don't have to learn any minor scales. All the white notes from A make up a minor scale. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. There's all our notes. Done. Let me show you the MIDI. This is essentially made up of 5 chords. Basically, when the lowest note changes and sticks there, that's a new chord. But we don't need all of this to know what's going on. Let me show you the simplified version. This is the riff in basic block chord form. So our chord progression is starting on chord 1. This is a chord 6. This is a chord 6. This is 4 and 7. 1, 6, 6, 4, 7. Why did I say this is the same as this? They both contain the same notes, it's just in a different order. In musical terms, this is called an inversion. You can see this is the same note, an F, note 6, it's just in a different octave. The one on the right is the normal way of making chord 6, where you have note 6, what we call the root note, at the bottom. Whereas if we make this chord with any other note at the bottom, that's called an inversion. So our progression is a 1, 6, 6, 4, 7. But inversions are common. That's not the interesting bit. If we look at what's going on underneath these top notes, the bass note for chord 1 is note 1. Under this chord 6, the bass is on 6. Chord 4 has note 4 in the bass, and chord 7 has note 7. Exactly as you would expect, all perfectly normal. However, it turns out this isn't a chord 6 at all, because the bass is playing note 7. Such a simple change on paper, but that's an iconic change. But don't take my word for it, let's do a comparison. What if the original riff just used a normal chord 7? Back to the original. Completely different vibe. I hope you agree. So what's that all about then? Was it a mistake? Probably not, given that it's Marshall Jefferson playing the piano. No, this is an actual thing. There's a few names for this chord. Sometimes they're called slash chords, sus chords, or if you're Bill Bailey, you might call it the smoke chord.
That's a lovely chord, that. That's a mood chord. You know that? That says smug, doesn't it? Smug.
But specifically in the context of dance music, I like to call it the someday chord. For several reasons. First of all, it's Marshall Jefferson producing, widely regarded as one of the founders of house. Secondly, this was the first house record to be signed by a major label. So even though this isn't a new chord, this is the first time many would have heard this chord in this context. Lastly, calling it the someday chord is far easier to remember than its real names, which we'll get to later. And in doing so, I hope it would catch on, because I want to hear more of it. Okay, so before I get all nerdy on you, what's the trick? What's the hack? So far, all we know is that in a minor key, if note 7 is in the bass, we can put chord 6 above it. But are there any others where the same thing works? Yes. This worked on chord progressions with either 1, 4, or 7 in them, in minor. On any of those chords, you can keep the bass note and try dropping the chord above to the next one down. That sounds much more confusing than it is, so let me show you an example. I've got a fairly simple piano part here from a modern piano house track, and the chord progression is a 1, 4, 5, 7. Also in A minor. How convenient. So if we were to put the normal root notes under these chords, 1, 4, 5, and 7, it sounds like this. However, if we wanted to try some of that someday flavor, we can take the chord 1, 4, or 7, or any combination of them, and we can try dropping the chord down 1 whilst leaving the bass alone. I'm going to try dropping chord 4 and chord 7. See how that sounds. So drop chord 4 to the next one in the scale, correct any notes that have fallen out of scale, put that on the white notes. So that's basically chord 3 over bass 4. And here too, we'll take our chord 7. This will be the same as someday. We're dropping chord 7 to chord 6, but keep the bass on 7. Let's have a listen. Good stuff. You might prefer just one of those, both of those, or none, but it's a simple trick to unlock more flavors for you to try. Now remember, this only works where there would have been a chord 1, 4, or 7. If we try dropping this chord 5 to chord 4 here, well, it's certainly a different flavor. I'm not sure it's a desirable one though. So 1, 4, or 7 in minor. If you're working in a major scale, the chords you can try this on are 2, 5, and 6. Right, so why does this work? What is going on under the hood? Let's go back to the block chord example. First of all, just in case I didn't make it clear, for those thinking the inversion is necessary, that's not the case. If I change this back to a normal triad, there we go, still works. The inversion is there in the original as more of a melodic choice. But in terms of the pure chord theory, not necessary. I mentioned earlier one of the possible names for this type of chord is a sus chord. No, that's not sus as in suspicious. It's an abbreviation of suspended. In my youth, I used to play in a big band, which was like a jazz swing band. And this type of chord would just be written as G sus. Like I said, easy to show, not easy to explain. Let me show you how we get to the name G sus. If we build a normal G chord here and keep extending upwards, you can see these notes are just extensions of a G chord. We've got a 7th, a 9th, and 11th. So you might think this could be some kind of G11 chord. But such are the rules of chord naming, we can't do that. It's because the chord is missing a crucial note, this one, the third above the root. This note is what determines whether a chord is major or minor. Let's ignore these upper notes for now while I explain. If the middle note of the chord is no longer here, but instead only 2 above the root, that's called a suspended second. When the middle note of the chord is up here, 4 above the root, that's a suspended 4th. So, because this chord does not have that 3rd above the root note, that means these notes here are not extensions on top of anything. That means they have to be classed as the 2 and the 4, just an octave above. Also, don't forget this 7th. So technically, the full name of this chord would be G suspended 2, 4, 7th, no 5th. You see why they just wrote G sus. Another name I mentioned earlier for this type of chord might be a slash chord. That comes from the way that chords are sometimes written down. So for example, something we've already discussed, the inversion. Sometimes you would write the inversion of this F chord like this, F stroke A, or slash A. That way, at a glance, the person playing the F chord knows that the A has to go at the bottom. That's certainly easier than its full name of F first inversion, and that can be applied to these chords also, where you might just call this an F stroke G. But how does that work? Because G is not in the chord of F, and this entire time I've been referring to it as some kind of G chord. Well, it's possible, because if we extend an F chord upwards, this would be our 7th. Here's the 9th. It turns out the 9th of this chord is a G. Now, technically, this isn't a 9th chord because there's no 7th in there, so we call this an add 9 chord. But you could totally describe this as an inverted F add 9. Anyway, all kinds of different names. Now you understand why I don't get too wrapped up in chord names. But hopefully now you understand a bit more about why it works. And hopefully you agree the someday chord is a much catchier name. Okie dokie, I hope you learned something. If you did, you know what to do. Don't forget to check the description for all the relevant links. And in the meantime, I will see you down there in the comments. Bye-bye.